The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome to this very first edition of Global Lens in 2024. I am Neha Khanna and here's wishing all our viewers a very happy, peaceful and safe New Year. As always, we have a packed show for you. Let's get started with the one story that continues to be our big focus here on Global Lens, the Israel-Hamas war. It's already claimed almost 22,000 Palestinian lives and 1,200 Israeli lives since it began on the 7th of October. But could the Israel-Hamas war continue all through 2024? That worrying indication has come from the Israeli military in the last 24 hours. Also, significantly, the Israeli military has announced it would begin to withdraw thousands of soldiers from Gaza ahead of a new phase in the war as it prepares for fighting in the Strip to last throughout 2024. The announcement also shows signs of Israel's gradual shift to a lower intensity phase of war, according to a senior US official. The hints at a lowered tempo in Gaza came as the US Navy announced that the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier was returning to its home port in Virginia after being deployed to the eastern Mediterranean following the outbreak of hostilities between Israel and Hamas. The United States has been pressing Israel to begin a more surgical targeting of Hamas in the besieged enclave to save civilian lives. The change in tactics seems to stem from the fact that troop reduction would allow some Israeli reservists to return to civilian life, shoring up Israel's war-battered economy and free up units in case of a wider conflict in the north with Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah. In a New Year's message, the Israel Defense Forces spokesperson said troop deployments were being adjusted to prepare for prolonged fighting. Daniel Hagari said some troops, especially reservists, would be withdrawn to allow them to regroup. He said, and I quote, "These adaptations are intended to ensure the planning and preparation for continuing the war in 2024. The IDF must plan ahead out of an understanding that there will be additional missions and the fighting will continue for the rest of the year." He added that some reservists would leave Gaza as soon as this week to allow them to re-energize ahead of the coming operations. Even as the rest of the world was celebrating the arrival of the new year, Gaza continued to get pounded by Israeli missiles and tank shells, with dozens of fresh killings being reported, including at the Al-Maghazi refugee camp. According to the United Nations, 85% of Gaza's 2.4 million people, that's almost 2 million, have now been displaced. Apart from death and devastation, there is fear of spread of disease. UN officials say thousands of people are living together in overcrowded camps with very poor water conditions, poor hygiene and very poor sanitation. These are all breeding grounds for various diseases. Also, the specter of hunger and starvation is looming large in Gaza, with food and other essential supplies in woefully short supply. Things are so bad that at the zoo in Rafah city, scores of people are sheltering between cages while animals are starving, with some having perished in the last few days. Over the weekend, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the war is at its height. "We are fighting on all of the fronts. We have huge success, but we also have painful cases. Achieving victory will require time. The war will continue for many more months," he said. Israel's far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has called for Palestinians to leave Gaza and make way for Israelis who could make the desert bloom, as he put it. However, the official line from the Israeli government is that Gazans will eventually be able to return to their homes, though the government is yet to outline how or when this will be possible. Additionally, Iranian-backed Houthi rebels have stepped up their attacks in the Red Sea, which they say are revenge against Israel for its military campaign in Gaza. There are fears that the attacks could escalate Israel's war against Hamas into a wider regional conflict. On Sunday, the US sank 3 Houthi boats and killed those aboard after coming under fire, marking the first occasion since tensions broke out that the US has killed members of this rebel group. The US has stated that it has no desire to enter a wider war, but it will act in self-defense. Later this week, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken will travel to the Middle East yet again to continue discussions with Israeli officials about the next phase of the war. Blinken's trip is a continuation of a Biden administration initiative of sending its most senior officials to Israel on a near weekly basis for direct in-person meetings with Israel's war cabinet. The topic of the war's trajectory has been at the center of conversations between American and Israeli officials, including a lengthy phone call between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu last week, which officials described as very direct and at times strained.
These days, we are also adjusting the plan of forces deployment in Gaza and in the area of reservists. Some of the reservist soldiers will return to their families and their jobs this week. This will allow a significant relief for the economy and will allow them to gather strength ahead of the coming activities in the next year. And the fighting will continue, and we will need them. These adjustments that are meant to ensure planning and preparation for the rest of 2024. The IDF must plan ahead with the understanding that we will be required to more missions and the continuation of the fighting all throughout this year. I have just returned from the Gaza Strip. There are met our troops. As they fight, they face our enemy, and behind them are Israel's southern communities. They know their mission, and their performance is excellent, so that here, in our southern communities, life will return to its course. In accordance with the recommendations given by the IDF and the defense establishment, we will soon be able to return displaced communities home in areas within a range of 4 to 7 kilometers north of the Gaza Strip. The first group of 7 communities has already been decided, and they have received the message. Kibbutz Dorot, where we are right now, is one of them. The National Reconstruction Administration, Takuma, which is responsible for the national mission, will handle the issue of education and other issues. So a gradual return will be possible. In the first stage, 7 communities, and going forward, all the rest of the communities.
All right, so what should be made of these significant developments? The year 2024 has only just begun. The war has gone on for 3 months now, and as we said, left 1,200 Israelis and close to 22,000 Palestinians dead. Where is this war headed? Let's try and make sense of this with our panel of experts. Joining me on Global Lens, Dr. Hariel Chore, a Palestinian affairs expert at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. Joining us live from Israel tonight, Irina Sukuman, national security and geopolitical analyst, joining us live from New York. And completing the panel tonight is our Indian guest, Major General Sanjay Meston, defense and geopolitical expert, joining us from the National Capital Region. Thank you so much to all my guests for joining me. I wish I could say this under better circumstances, but a happy new year to all of you nonetheless. And we're all hoping and praying for peace to return in 2024. On that note, Dr. Hariel Chore, let me begin with you. These are significant developments. It seems Israel has decided to change tack, shift to lower intensity operations, more surgical operations, as it were. This, of course, comes after weeks of pressure from the United States. We are being told that, thousands of troops are going to be withdrawn. The reservists will be given an opportunity to, quote unquote, re-energize themselves ahead of the coming operations. But the most significant statement that has actually come from Daniel Hagari is that this war is likely to last all of 2024. Now, that sounds extremely ominous and alarming, given, as I said, 1,200 people on the Israeli side and 22,000 on the Palestinian side are already dead in the last 3 months of the war. How do you see these developments and the statement that's come from the IDF?
Well, hello, Nia, and Happy New Year. First of all, let me correct your numbers. It's 1,200 people who died on October 7th, but add on this, of course, another 180 soldiers,
yes,
who died during the war. Often we would like to see as a process, as unexpected thing, unexpected development. That's not the case here at all. It's just another stage of the war, as I'm sure the Major General will also say. It's just the second phase after Israel took over the areas it wanted to take over. It includes Khan Yunis and the central camps, and of course the northern part, which was the most important one. And now it allows Israel to release, as you said, most of the reservists, which took a major part in this fighting, and leave it for a more surgical infantry and underground special forces kind of fighting. And that's not because necessarily the U.S. pressure. I remind you that I think a month and a half ago we were talking here and we said all kinds of timetables of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we see we're in early January and everything is okay, and Israel is just moving. By the way, not immediately. It will take another 2 weeks or so to really shift the way they're fighting there in order to conclude the ground operation. And then you'll see something which is more surgical, dealing with guerrilla fighters and, of course, the tunnels. So nothing here is unexpected or, random. Everything is planned, and it's probably as it should be.
Okay, you say it's probably as it should be, but of course those around the globe who have been desperately hoping for a ceasefire and for an end to this war will not agree. I need to take a quick break here on the show. I'll request my guests to stay on. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after this very short break.
Seeing is believing. Or is it? These are your favorite celebrities that you saw in the videos. But what if I told you that they are not?
Today, deepfake is one of the biggest challenges that the digital ecosystem is facing.
Cannot identify what is deepfake and what is real.
We have seen Rashmika Mandana go through the same thing, and this is becoming a common problem.
Everybody is going to be targeted.
The execution there's a laxity in our regulatory execution. In times to come, that is going to cost us a lot.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing the Israel-Hamas war. Major General Sanjay Melston, let me come to you. Sir, I think most people around the world would have welcomed the fact that Israel has decided to withdraw a large number of its troops from Gaza. It has begun the process of withdrawing a lot of its tanks. The fact that now the focus is going to shift to lower intensity and surgical operations. And, you even have the US Navy announcing that the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier, which had been deployed in the Eastern Mediterranean, is now going back home. All these developments would have been welcomed by most people were it not for the fact that Israel actually is saying this war could last all of 2024. Should we be alarmed? How do you see these developments?
Neha, good evening and Happy New Year to you and to the fellow panelists. Very relevant issues raised by you. Firstly, yes, it is definitely a good news that some of the reservists will be pulled back. Most of the armored tanks, etc., would also be redeployed, or rather, they will be pulled back. And more so, the war phasing has commenced, the second phase has commenced. And also, it implies that with this phasing, the operations will take a different dimension. The phase one of the operations was predominantly dominated by three strategies, I would say. Firstly, it was pounding of the entire Gaza Strip, especially areas where they suspected targets or the underground tunnels, etc. So that had preponderance of firepower in terms of air, missiles, drones, etc. Simultaneously, later when the infantry went, that was again a specific operation. Infantry, along with the support of armor mechanized, they went in and they started clearing a lot of built-up areas, and that has also been reasonably successful in North Gaza. A lot of success was there, and thereafter they have focused towards the central Gaza and South Gaza. And the third phase was specific targeting and eliminating the Hamas terrorists and their tunnel network. So these were the various phases of the first major phase, which has now been actually more or less concluded. Now the operation is phase two. Firstly, let's understand what is this phase two in generality. This will now, obviously, there will be less of air and missile targeting, but yes, it is not ruled out. That means the civilian casualties would be very, very less. So it is a welcome step. Now the operations will be predominantly infantry and special forces, especially targeting intelligence operations. So it would be seek intelligence, and after specific intelligence, a specific operation would be carrying on. And this has to be predominantly done by infantry and the special forces which will be operating there. However, they will be supported by requisite firepower, because infantry never moves alone, so it has to have the firepower, and air also will give firepower, that time missiles and drones. But now it will not be everywhere, so it will be in specific operations. So implication of all this is, firstly, Israeli troops in large numbers, 5 brigades plus pullback. Second implication is that with this kind of operation, the civilian casualties would be very, very less now. And therefore, you raised a question to the previous speaker that though it is a welcome step, but the world was looking for a ceasefire. Now, I think this dimension, also the fact that Gerald Ford is now going back, these are all hints that operations will continue at a low scale, a low intensity scale. So what is the implication? That I think in Gaza, aid will be allowed. Israelis will be open to that. And therefore, the pressure will also reduce, because the civilian casualties will come down in large numbers. Because right now, every day we were seeing huge number of casualties. So when casualties will, be very, very less, obviously the international pressure, the media, etc., and thereafter it will be a daily affair of a deployment. Now I will take back you to Afghanistan. Afghanistan, when the US forces enter with ISAF, about 49 countries, they were there initially for 3 years. And having cleared the Taliban, and of course eliminated a lot of Al-Qaeda people, the Taliban went to Pakistan, and thereafter in 2003, US troops started pulling back to Iraq. Why? Because they felt the situation is stabilized. Therefore, in Gaza, the Israelis feel that the situation to some extent has been stabilized. Their presence will ensure that the Hamas does not regroup, does not launch another attack or a counter-attack on the Israelis. And therefore now Israeli forces will be present in the entire Gaza Strip doing specific surgical operations based on intelligence.
Okay.
So firstly, presence is ensured. So it is not a full-fledged warfare. The dimensions change. No, it is like insurgency or counter-terrorism. Earlier it was something like a war, full-fledged war. So the dimensions change. So I think all these measures are to some extent good. However, let me also not tell you, it also gives some advantage to Hamas. A lot of their military structure has been degraded. Their infrastructure has been degraded. Many of their cadres have been killed. But yet, we have seen that the Israelis, even on, the Hamas has also on the New Year fired some rockets, about 20 rockets in Tel Aviv. So
Yes.
what does this prove is that Hamas will also get time to regroup and also start doing certain activities where it can cause some significant damage to the Israelis. Possible.
Okay.
So it is advantages to them also. But the fact of the matter is Israeli troops will continue, and why 1 year? It will take more than 1 year also, because see, after all, why Israel is going to be there? Their aim and intent is very clear, to degrade and destroy Hamas. But more than that, it is also looking for some kind of governance, maybe after 1 year.
A political settlement, and perhaps some sort of an alternative that can emerge to Hamas.
Absolutely.
For governance. However, there is a big question mark over who can really step into the breach, because Israelis keep saying even the Palestinian Authority is not acceptable to them. But that's still some way off in the future. Right now, the focus continues to be on war. And Major General Sanjay Meston actually welcomes these developments, the fact that now we're going to see lower intensity and more surgical operations in Gaza. But Irina Zuckerman, let me ask you that. And, my job is to play the devil's advocate. And it's not as if I do not welcome these developments that will hopefully reduce civilian casualties. But the question I want to ask you is this. We may now see more precision targeting of Hamas and lower intensity operations, but it's still a war that threatens to continue for another year or longer. We all remember how Russian President Vladimir Putin had said that his so-called special military operations against Ukraine would be over in a fortnight. It's going to be 2 years on the 24th of February next month. Therefore, my question is, how much longer do you believe this war will continue? And do you not think that the very fact that the Israeli military says this could last for all of 2024 would actually be very alarming for the entire world?
Thank you so much for inviting me again, and Happy New Year. I'm in a bit of a disagreement with the other two speakers. A very quick answer to your question would be the war will last for as long as necessary to meet its military goals. But then we would not be really honest with ourselves here about what's actually going on. I'm very much looking at the bottom line. The bottom line of the war is not, contrary to what many people think, to minimize civilian casualties, and it's not to satisfy the international opinion. It is to destroy the entire military infrastructure of Hamas. So where are we with this? It is true that in a relatively quick period of time, Israel has significantly increased its control over Gaza, but where does it leave us in terms of actual elimination of Hamas? Just today, there was an article in Wall Street Journal pointing to the difficulties Israel is facing in the south of Gaza and Far Yunis and other areas. They literally have to go door to door due to the accumulation of weapons in every civilian infrastructure, residential buildings, kindergartens, and so forth. So that alone is going to take a long time, whether it's a high-intensity conflict or low-intensity conflicts. The logistics of the operation, the level of penetration of Hamas is so substantial that it would take a very long time to go through all of that. Now, Israel states that it has eliminated about 8,500 to 9,000 fighters from Hamas, which leaves many thousands more, because it was estimated before the start of the war that Hamas had approximately 30,000 to 50,000 fighters. If it continues to rely on quote-unquote surgical strikes, as the US has demanded, how many of these fighters would actually be eliminated? Is it really enough to eliminate just the top echelons of the leadership? Well, so far we have not gotten even to that point, because both Yahya Sinwar and his brother and Mohammed Adayef appear to be alive and operational and not anywhere close to being eliminated. When it comes to secondary leadership, fighters who are actually operating on the streets, many have been killed, yes, but the rest are not easily identifiable. They don't wear military uniforms, they hide among civilians, and quite frankly, they have been receiving a lot of assistance from civilians, and it's very difficult to distinguish who is and who is not a fighter. So which of the military goals have been reached? The problem is it's hard to say. And it's also hard to say that you can actually that you can eliminate the number of people you need through these surgical strikes. Israel has maybe extended the war by doing so. It's unclear whether it will actually save lives of real civilians or of Hamas fighters. And at the end of the day, what it signals to Hamas is that Israel is under pressure from external factors, and that if they play the game long enough, if they continue pushing out the narrative that a lot of civilians are being killed, Israel can be forced or pressured into providing them a sort of relief, whether through ceasefires and pauses and deals, or through downgrading its capabilities of withdrawing forces. Whatever the real reasons for the forces withdrawal, and there are rumors that it has nothing to do with Gaza and more to do with the fact that there is a concern about the Hezbollah northern front.
Yes,
the signal that Hamas is pushing out is very much that their narratives work, that the narratives of extremely high casualties are forcing Israel to change tack, and therefore it is not permitting them to reach their military goals, which would degrade Hamas sufficiently that not only the top leaders would be eliminated, but that Hamas could not come back to power at all. And if you only eliminate Sinwar and his ilk, that would not be sufficient. I think everyone can agree.
Well, a lot of the leaders are in Qatar. Let's not forget that. If you refer to the leadership of Hamas, many of them are actually sitting far away in the luxury and comfort and safety of Doha. But it's interesting what you say. You do concede that Israel, there has been pressure on Israel. There's been immense pressure from its closest ally, the United States, and it would be correct to say that, of course, that pressure has worked, and at the same time, the reservists are being withdrawn to free them up, possibly, deal with an eventuality where Israel may have to take on the Hezbollah in the north, because this conflict, as we speak, seems to already be widening in some respects. All right, we will continue with this conversation. Please stay on with us. I need to take another quick break. We'll be back in just a moment.
Yes, the scale of the attack surprised us.
When you get a series of alerts, 16 intelligence alerts, if Maharashtra government at that time had alerted the Coast Guard and the Navy, this 2611 would not have happened at all.
And one of the details they had planned was to use these dhagas to mislead the investigative agencies.
All this was to be presented as a Hindu terror.
So it was a Pakistan operation. The LET was the front end.
As the attacks were on, it was clear that they were planned and launched from Pakistani territory.
For all of those victims of terror that was exported from Pakistan over the years, including but not limited to 2611.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
Pakistani spy agency ISI's sinister plan to target India. Training women to honey trap top civil and military officials. Counter honey trapping ops initiated by India. But gullible victims still caught in the web. Top military intelligence experts break down the web of deception. Colonel Hani Bakshi explains the phenomena of honey trap.
जहाँ पे भी आपको लगेगा, उनको लगेगा कि there is a person who is susceptible to women, who's making a lot of women friends on the social media. That is where they will make a spoof account and then start luring the person.
Colonel Pavitran Rajan decodes the psyche of the victim and the predator.
But when you go up the chain, no one enforces it to people at the top. That disciplinary regime and the security regime is not enforced at the top. And they usually have a public profile where it is much more easier to approach that person.
A News9 special on how modern technology has added teeth to the ancient spying tactic.
Our story takes you inside Pakistan's honey trap machine.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens with me, Neha Khanna. We're talking about the Israel-Hamas war. Let me go back to my guest, Dr. Harel Chore. I know you don't speak for the Israeli government, but I need to ask you this question nonetheless. Israel, including your Prime Minister, has said time and again that we have no interest in reoccupying Gaza in the long term. Of course, US President Joe Biden has repeatedly said that would be a big mistake. Israel should never reoccupy Gaza. The official line of the Israeli government also has been of late that Gazans will eventually be able to return to their homes, especially in northern Gaza, though we have no time frame for it. And then in the midst of it all, Israel's, may I add, far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, says Palestinians should leave Gaza and make way for Israelis who could, quote-unquote, make the desert bloom. My question is Israel not sending out extremely conflicting signals, both to the Palestinians and to the world at large?
Well, in my personal view, I think it's a mistaken statement, but I'm not surprised. As you said, he is from the far right, a hardliner from the very extreme right party in Israel. But he's reflecting only his own views, okay? Let's remember that his party is not even passing the bar of election. If election would have taken place today, he would not even be elected. However, he's reflecting the idea of several Israelis, but certainly not most of them. I don't think any serious Israeli is considering to go back to Gaza or to resettle in the Gaza Strip as we had until 2005. That's not on the table at all. It's just reflecting his own views. And I think it's indeed damaging the effort. But, you will find so many others who will tell you that it doesn't reflect anything else, but rather than Bezalel Smotrich idea. Nia, with your permission, I would just like to address something that the previous speaker said. There is no such thing as their narrative works as they pushed us out. That's absolutely absurd. I mean, in real life, I know that's their narrative. She was not, of course, saying anything which is not true in that sense. They are telling all sorts of truths. All sorts of narratives. They are saying that They killed thousands of Israeli soldiers. The Al Jazeera is echoing that narrative of hundreds of vehicles who've been destroyed. It has nothing to do with the truth. They are almost fully occupied already above the ground. Hundreds of them are dying underground with new technologies implemented in units, and they know that very well. And let us meet here again a year from now and recheck of what happened during this year. And I'm telling you, it will be a long fighting, and I think the Major General put it really in a very precise way. But that's how it works with terrorism and guerrilla. You need to be patient and really to eradicate them and to smoke them out from those tunnels that they are. But you know, it's impossible to live there forever in those tunnels. You should hear the testimonies of people who are surrendering. By the way, she mentioned 9,000 terrorists who've been killed. But what about all the injuries? Double that at least twice, so another 18,000 who are casualties, basically, namely unfunctional. Not to mention
the trouble is we don't know out of these 22,000 casualties how many were Hamas terrorists and how many were civilians. I know that we don't have segregated figures, but at the end of the day, we know that civilians are caught in the crossfire, and unfortunately, even though you said that this is what happens with war, the trouble with war is people die, innocents die every day, and that's happening in Gaza as well. And it's interesting you say that the finance minister does not speak for most of Israelis. There's been another very interesting development in Israel in the last 24 hours. The Israeli Supreme Court has struck down the controversial judicial overhaul, which has come as a blow to the Netanyahu government, and there are many commentators who are now asking, could we actually see a split in Israel's war cabinet with the likes of Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir, of course, belligerently advocating for these controversial reforms on the one hand, and the likes of Yoav Gallant and, Benny Gantz on the other, vociferously opposed to it. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But since I'm running out of time, I'll take closing comments from my other panelists. Major General Sanjay Meston, even though we know that for weeks now the Houthi rebels have been attacking shipping vessels in the Red Sea. The US, of course, has been retaliating, but this is the first time that over the weekend the United States actually killed some members of the Houthi group. What would you say about that development? Because there is this constant talk about how this war could actually widen in the region.
Neha, firstly, the war is between Israel and Hamas, and therefore Houthi, yes, they may be supporting Hamas, but they have got no right to, disturb the shipping in the international waters. They definitely have no right, and therefore countries, whether it is United States and 10 like-minded countries and even Indians, I think we have also made statement that our ships and all will move there, though we are not part of this setup of 10. So we have everyone in international waters has got full right to defend themselves and defend not only that, you have to prevent piracy and all these kind of things. So these are within the international order. Therefore, they have got full right and liberty to take these kind of targets. And I think it's a very, very clear message to the Houthi rebels. And not only that, if they continue, then I would not be surprised that in Yemen, their certain strongholds can also be targeted, maybe by the United States, the UK. Possibility exists. But definitely, whatever Houthis are doing in international waters with the backing of Iran, I think, and if you see Iran also recently, when two of the Indian crew also suffered in two ships.
Yes, the Pentagon said Iran was behind it. Iran denied it. Yes, but so fact of the matter is, it is well known that the Houthi rebels are causing a lot of trouble, disrupting international shipping sea routes, and they have the full backing of Iran. I don't think that can be denied. I'm so sorry, sir. I'm out of time. Irina, very quickly, wrap up this discussion for you. Reports suggest that President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke yet again last week. It was a lengthy phone conversation, and officials described it as a direct conversation and at times strained. Would it be correct to say that this war and the growing civilian death toll in Gaza has put strain on Israel U.S. ties?
Actually, I would say it's the opposite. They strengthened the ties. The Biden administration sold more weapons to Israel just before the start of the new year, doing better than Congress in that respect. I do think there are differences over issues of strategy, but not about the goals and objectives of the war itself. And I think the White House continues to be supportive of the ultimate goal of destroying Hamas. I also think that down the line, the US will be forced to reconsider its own strategic posture in the region, given the increase in hostilities from the Houthis, the continuing hostilities by Hezbollah on the northern border.
Say that the ties are stronger than ever, and there is no doubt that that the US continues to publicly support Israel. But fact of the matter is that the growing civilian death toll has been a matter of great concern for the Biden administration for a very long time now, and it is something they have actually made no secret of and said rather publicly. On that note, Major General Sanjay Meston, Dr. Harel Chore, Irina Sukuman, thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens. I look forward to having all of you back on the show. All right, in other news, in a major development that is being seen as a blow to Netanyahu's far-right government, Israel's Supreme Court has struck down a controversial plan to limit the powers of the judiciary. It's an unprecedented move that has reignited fierce tensions in the country as it wages war against Hamas in Gaza. The verdict has reopened an emotional and heated debate that had raged in Israel throughout 2023 but was sidelined following Hamas's terror attacks on the 7th of October. This ruling, some argue, could also cause a split within Israel's war cabinet that's made up of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and two prominent critics of his efforts to overhaul the judiciary. The Supreme Court ruled by 8 votes to 7 that a government amendment to the so-called reasonableness law should not stand. The bill had stripped the Supreme Court of its powers to declare government decisions unreasonable and was the first major piece of a multi-pronged government effort to weaken the judiciary to be passed by the Knesset, Israel's parliament, last year. Netanyahu's next moves will be watched closely by all sides, with the threat of a constitutional crisis looming should he attempt to push ahead with this controversial change. All right, let's now shift our focus to Japan, that has unfortunately seen two major tragedies right at the start of the year. Two tragedies have struck Japan in the first 2 days of the new year. A day after a massive earthquake jolted the country, a plane caught fire today, leaving 5 people dead and at least 17 injured. The Japan Airlines Flight 516 burst into flames the moment it landed on the runway of Haneda Airport. More than 100 fire trucks were dispatched to the scene and most flights had to be cancelled. Now, 5 of the crew members on board the Japan Coast Guard flight were killed and 1 injured when this flight collided with the Japan Airlines flight. Japan Airlines is now investigating what exactly happened. Of course, this is an incident that has sent shockwaves through Japan and indeed the entire world. The incident coming just a day after a devastating earthquake shook Japan, leaving almost 50 people dead. According to Japan's cabinet secretary, there are at least 120 people still waiting to be rescued following the 7.5 magnitude earthquake that struck Japan's western coast on Monday. The government's priority is to save lives, the cabinet secretary said, reminding residents to be alert for aftershocks. Over 950 evacuation centers have been set up across the Ishikawa and Niigata prefectures that have been the worst hit. Over 57,000 people have been evacuated following the earthquake, which triggered the collapse of scores of buildings, fires and tsunami alerts as far away as eastern Russia, prompting orders for residents to evacuate the affected coastal areas. At least 48 people are confirmed dead in the Ishikawa prefecture. Scenes of devastation have emerged along Japan's western coast as rescuers race to save residents who are still trapped in the rubble of the buildings that collapsed. Remember, there were multiple aftershocks, more than 155 at last count. The quake struck the Noto Peninsula in the central prefecture of Ishikawa. Japan's Met Agency has now lifted the tsunami advisories along the portions of the country's western coast, but more than 24 hours after the quake struck, there has been limited access to the northern part of the secluded peninsula that has been hit hard. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has said a destroyed road has cut off access to the area, and he says rescue efforts are a battle against time, especially the victims of collapsed buildings have to be saved as soon as possible. All right, in other news, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has responded to criticism from the Western media of his recent visit to Moscow and meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, describing India's relationship with Russia as important and steady. Jaishankar has asserted that the ties with Moscow have been beneficial for New Delhi. He also said that India needs to approach thoughtfully while dealing with other countries. In an interview to news agency ANI, Jaishankar said, "I have said this publicly in Moscow, even before my meeting with President Putin, that we value this relationship. It's a relationship that has served India well. It is a time-tested partnership." Remember, he met with the Russian president, the deputy prime minister, and the foreign minister, amongst others. This was a high-profile visit that made global headlines, remember, with the Russia-Ukraine war still raging. The foreign minister in this interview to ANI also talked about India's strained ties with Pakistan and China and the prickly Khalistan issue that resulted in souring of ties between India and Canada recently. The foreign minister also commented on the grand success of the G20 summit in New Delhi, where Jaishankar said that India has been engaging with nations on mutual interests and many more global leaders now want to visit India.
No, if people can't read me, that means my mind games are working. Okay, but the answer is, honestly, I see no reason that people should take any, what was happening other than at face value, because we have always maintained that the Russia relationship is a very important one, very steady one. I've written about it in my book, and I said it in Moscow. I mean, I said it publicly in Moscow. Even before my meeting with President Putin happened, which is that we value this relationship. It's a relationship that has served India well. Look, I'm looking at it now from an Indian perspective. You must look from the perspective of your interest, not allow other people to decide your judgment and your responses. Again, look, a country which has maximum friends and minimum adversaries is obviously one with a smart diplomacy. So, why would a country restrict its friends? Why would it say, I will choose you and not choose you, unless your interest compelled you to do that? I am today focusing on how do I expand my relationships, how am I more present, how am I more influential. So for me, the more friends I have, the more forums I'm member of, the more places where I can influence, sway outcomes is good for me. They would say, if you are a democracy, you must do this, this, this. So if you should ask them, well, if that is so, please look at the mirror and tell me how you were behaving as a democracy. So everybody, after all, look, it's not like every country has its values and beliefs, but every country has its interests as well. And every country finds a balance. So when others come and tell you that you have no interest, that you must go by what has been decided elsewhere, that's when you lack that self-confidence to say, excuse me, I think I'm going to do something else because I've looked at it very carefully and my interests have taken me in a certain direction or asked me to take a certain position. Look, I do not see a correlation there. No? I mean, getting everybody around on a G20 has nothing to do with the Khalistani issue in Canada. I mean, the Khalistani issue is not a new issue. The Khalistani issue has existed for decades. It's not for me to speculate on other prime ministers, but I will tell you the issue at heart. The issue at heart is the fact that in Canadian politics, these Khalistani forces have been given a lot of space and have been allowed to indulge in activities which I think are damaging to the relationship, clearly not in India's interest, but I would argue not in Canada's interest either. If you look at the last 75 plus years of our foreign policy, we've had a strain of realism about China, and we have had a strain of, I can say, you can call it idealism, romanticism, non-realism, you can say. And it begins right from day one, I mean, where there is a very sharp difference of opinion how to respond to China between Nehru and Sardar Patel. So I would say the Modi government has been very much more in conformity with the strain of realism which originated from Sardar Patel. I think today, what will happen with China? I mean, I argue for dealing with China from a basis of realism, that strain of realism which I feel extends all the way from Sardar Patel to Narendra Modi. That is the strain of realism which I feel should allow us to have a certain approach. The alternative strain, which starts from Nehru's, in a sense, China first policy, because he says, first let China take its seat, then we will see for India. I don't believe it's a pivot we have taken. We have tried to construct a relationship which is based, as I say, on three mutuals. And the fact is that unless there is a mutuality of, that mutuality is recognized, this relationship will find it very difficult to progress. And today, part of our problem is exactly because in 2020 agreements were disregarded, and the mutuality on which this whole relationship is predicated has not been followed, that we have the situation we have. So when you ask me where would it go, I would say a lot of it would depend on what is the Chinese policy. What Pakistan was trying to do, not now, but over multiple decades, was really to use cross-border terrorism to bring India to the table. Okay? That in essence was its core policy. We have made that irrelevant by not playing that game. Now, it's not a case that we don't will not deal with a neighbor. After all, at the end of the day, a neighbor is a neighbor. But it is that we will not deal, on the basis of terms that they set where the practice of terrorism is deemed as legitimate and effective in order to bring you to the table.
Let's now shift our focus to India's neighborhood. Elections are around the corner in Bangladesh. Let's get you an update on what's happening there. As general elections approach this week in Bangladesh, opposition leader Abdul Moin Khan has said he has been forced to hide out in the homes of a string of acquaintances until nominations closed, trying to escape a government crackdown. The former minister and his Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP, are not even contesting the 7th January election in which Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is chasing a fourth straight term despite a bleak economy that needed an IMF bailout last year. 77-year-old Khan said, "We're not even in the election, but they're still not sparing us." His party decided to boycott the polls after Prime Minister Hasina refused to cede power to a caretaker government to run the polls. Now the BNP says that 10 million of its party workers are on the run after the arrests of nearly 25,000 following deadly anti-government protests in October last year. All right, and staying with news from Bangladesh, which, as we said, goes to polls on the 7th of this month. A court in Bangladesh has sentenced Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus to 6 months in jail for allegedly violating the country's labour laws. Professor Yunus's supporters say the case is politically motivated.
I'm very happy today. A court in Bangladesh on Monday sentenced Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus to 6 months imprisonment for labour law violations, according to protesters. It's a case his supporters have claimed is politically motivated. 83-year-old Yunus and his Grameen Bank won the 2006 Peace Prize for their work to lift millions out of poverty. They have been granting tiny loans of under $100 to the rural poor of Bangladesh, pioneering a global movement now known as microcredit. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, however, has accused him of, quote, sucking blood from the poor. Yunus's supporters say the government is attempting to discredit him because he once considered setting up a political party to rival Hasina's Awami League. Human rights groups have accused Hasina and her government of targeting political dissent as she seeks her fourth consecutive term in a January 7th election. Yunus and 3 employees from Grameen Telecom, a company he founded, were convicted on Monday of violating the labour laws. The courts later granted them bail pending a possible appeal.
All right, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow. And once again, here's wishing all our viewers a very happy, peaceful and safe New Year.
Bangalore traffic is an example of something that has gone wrong with our system. We